Pan, or The Boy Who Wouldn't Grow Up, first premiered in 1904. While this is certainly Barrie's most famous play, he had already made a name for himself in the world of theatre. Before Peter, Barrie had already written two well-received plays, Quality Street in 1901 and The Admirable Crichton in 1902. Barrie actually had a very successful career as a playwright with many productions to his name, but that's not what we're here to talk about today. So, let's talk about Peter. I don't have any play merch from this one. I have seen a production of Peter Pan here in Dallas, but I think I have a playbill, but it's somewhere at my parents' house. You know, I wore my Phantom shirt. You know, it's theater related. Also, I wore my kilt because J.M. Barrie was from Scotland. Look how fucking cute I am. Also, the Ren Fair was cancelled. So, just wanted to wear my kilt. But look what I got last year! Still a little kilt for your drinks. But yeah. So he was from Scotland. He was born in Dyslexia Town. No, you know what? That's not fair. I already offended my English ancestors. I can at least be nice to my Scottish ones.
Kirriemuir.
Kirriemuir. I love that. That's beautiful. I want to go there. Okay, sorry, I keep getting distracted. So in this segment, we are going to have a brief-ish overview of what happens in the play. We're going to go over mostly just like the main plot points, things that we can compare to the movies that we're going to see later on. Also, if you've never been to a live production, don't worry, because every single official production, high school, elementary school, local playhouse, has uploaded their performance onto YouTube. Yeah, you know what? I don't need any fancy schmancy production. I need to see this play the way it was intended, recited by 9-year-olds in their pajamas. Hey, look, I found my drill team gloves. They don't match though. They're both left hands. Don't tell my captain. I don't want to get a demerit. So this is the plays of J.M. Barrie. I think this was published in 1930, so a couple years before he died. Okay. Try to be very gentle. Now, the original play was not a musical. The pirates sang a few shanties and Wendy sang in her sleep about wanting a fairy house, but it was only adapted into the musical version we know now in the 1950s. So, here is what happens.
Act 1. The play begins in the nursery of the Darling family, where children Wendy, John, and Michael are playing before bedtime as their parents get ready to leave for the evening. The Darling parents have a party to attend and will be leaving their children in the care of their nurse, a dog named Nana, played by a person in a suit. Mrs. Darling, after helping her husband tie his tie, tells Mr. Darling that she is nervous leaving the children because she saw a boy at the nursery window on a previous night. Mr. Darling insists that that's impossible because the nursery is 3 floors up, but Mrs. Darling produces the boy's shadow as proof. The children insist they don't want to go to bed, Michael specifically saying that he doesn't want to take his medicine. Mr. Darling tells him to be a man and take it, that he takes his medicine without complaining. So Wendy proposes Mr. Darling and Michael take it together. Mr. Darling tricks Michael into taking it alone, then decides to pull a prank on Nana by putting the medicine in her bowl to drink. The family think that isn't funny at all. Mr. Darling throws a fit because he thinks the dog is more loved than he, so he makes Nana sleep in the yard outside. The children are put to bed, the night lights are turned on, and the parents leave. Tinkerbell, who is generally played by a light on a string, but sometimes an actress, a laser pointer, or a doll, enters the nursery to find the shadow, followed closely behind by Peter. Peter finds the shadow, but is unable to stick it on. He cries, waking Wendy, who offers to sew it on for him. The two talk, Peter asking about bedtime stories and Wendy asking about Neverland. There is also the conversation I mentioned earlier about the kiss and the thimble. In the end, Peter asks Wendy to come back with him to Neverland to be the mother of he and the Lost Boys. Wendy agrees so long as she can bring her brothers. Act 2. The audience is shown Neverland. In modern adaptations, it looks like it opens with a dance number from the natives, and yes, that's what I'm going to be calling them, more on that later, along with shenanigans between them, the Lost Boys, and the pirates. The Lost Boys wonder when Peter will be back, are spotted by the pirates, and flee. We spend some time with the pirates. Hook and Smee talk about how Peter cut off Hook's hand and threw it to the crocodile, who also swallowed a ticking clock, so that the audience knows what the heck is going on with that, and he sits on a large mushroom, only to jump right off of it and claim that it's hot. This mushroom turns out to be a chimney for the Lost Boys' hideout. Hook devises a plan to make a poisoned cake and leave it near the chimney for the boys to eat, and then he and the pirates are chased away by the natives. The boys return to the stage, where Tinkerbell tells them that a windy bird approaches and that Peter wants them to shoot it. Toodles does so immediately, and Wendy falls to the ground with an arrow in her chest. The boys realize Wendy is not a bird, but a girl, just as Peter arrives. Toodles tells Peter to kill him for what he's done, but it's discovered that Wendy is not dead, but just knocked out, and the acorn kiss that he had given her earlier was around her neck as a necklace and stopped the arrow. The boys are about to take Wendy down below to their hideout, but decide their hands are too dirty, so instead they build a house around her, and when she wakes up, they beg her to be their mother. Act 3. Act 3 takes place in the Mermaid's Lagoon. Depending on what version of the play you watch, there might be no actors depicting the mermaids, because honestly, they aren't really important to this scene. Peter and Wendy are just there because in the lagoon is Marooner's Rock, where mutinous pirates are tied up and left to be drowned at high tide. Once there though, Peter and Wendy see a small boat approaching, containing Starkey, Smee, and a captive Tiger Lily. Starkey and Smee are meant to leave Tiger Lily on the rock, but Peter imitates Hook's voice and tells them to let her go. The real Hook enters and begins arguing with the fake Hook. Eventually, the truth is understood, and Hook and Peter fight. The pirates flee, and Peter and Wendy are on the rock, which is growing smaller with the tide. In some versions, mermaids are swimming around and trying to drown them, while in others, the mermaids aren't even there. Really, it's up to the director. Peter is injured, or possibly just pretending, and he says that he is unable to fly. He ties Wendy to a kite, and she is carried away. Peter, alone, mutters the famous phrase, "To die would be an awfully big adventure." However, a bird nest comes by on the water, and he is able to sail home on it. In some versions, the lights go down with him on the rock with a cliffhanger of what will happen, but either way, he's fine. Act 4. Act 4 begins in the hideout underground. Wendy and the Lost Boys are eating dinner and waiting for Peter to come home. Peter and the natives approach. In the play, Peter just comes underground, while in the musical, Peter and the natives have a song about how they're friends now, but either way, it eventually leads to Wendy telling the boys a bedtime story, either about fictional characters or about her own parents, and/or an eventual conversation between Peter and Wendy about how Wendy is not really Peter and the boys' mother, and she wants to go home. An argument ensues, which ends with Wendy, her brothers, and the Lost Boys deciding they all want to go back to the Darling home, and Peter will stay in Neverland, where he will never have to grow up. Up above the hideout, the natives and the pirates are having a battle, wherein the pirates eventually win, and to convince the boys below that the natives have won, Hook and the pirates bang the tom-toms. The boys head to the surface, expecting to meet their allies, and Peter goes to sleep. Wendy and the boys are all captured, and Hook, who is unable to get all the way into the hideout because he's an adult and too big for the entrance, is able to put poison into Peter's medicine, and slinks away. Tinkerbell wakes Peter to tell him about Wendy and the boys, and Peter insists on taking his medicine before going to save them. To save him, Tinkerbell drinks the medicine and begins to fade. Peter turns to the audience, and vaguely to boys and girls around the world, asking if they believe in fairies. The audience claps, and Tinkerbell is saved. And this audience participation is where the lore that clapping will save a fairy's life comes from. Act 5. On the pirate ship, the Jolly Roger, Hook has the boys lined up and ready to walk the plank. For a moment, Hook has a little pity party about how no children love him.
I'm told that no little children love me. Do you love me, little girl? I'll come back to you later. Think about that answer.
Hook turns to the boys and says that he is going to make them walk the plank, but he has room on his ship for 2 cabin boys. The boys insist their mother wouldn't want them to be pirates. Hook asks John if he wants to be a pirate, and he does, but also asks if he can be a pirate and also be loyal to King George. The pirates say no, so John refuses, and so does Michael. Wendy is brought out to say her final goodbyes to them all. Before they can walk the plank, the pirates hear a tick-tock, supposedly from the clock inside of the crocodile. In the chaos, Peter is able to start killing pirates one by one, until he reveals himself as Peter Pan, the Avenger! So Hook and Peter have a sword fight about it. Hook doesn't want to lose, so he tries to blow up the ship, Peter throws the bomb overboard, and Hook jumps overboard into the mouth of the crocodile. Act 5, Scene 2. We are back in the nursery, with Mrs. and Mr. Darling talking about what's been going on in the children's absence. They've been depressed. Mr. Darling has banished himself to the doghouse, where he spends every second of every day. He even has people carry him to work while he's inside of the doghouse. Peter enters through the window, which was open for the children to come back. He's mad, but he eventually leaves, and Wendy and John and Michael fly in. The kids decide to surprise their parents by pretending to be asleep in their beds. But when Mrs. Darling sees them, she says that she's so used to seeing them in her dreams that she doesn't think that this is real. The kids get up and embrace their parents, and eventually the Lost Boys enter, asking to be adopted. Now, here's a detail that is sometimes changed or just not included. In the play script that I read in that book that I showed in the video, Slightly gets there late and says he can't be adopted like the others. Liza, the Darling's other servant, who's like a human and not a dog, asks if his name is Slightly. He says, "Yes, how did you know?" And she said, "I can feel it in my bones." So Slightly isn't adopted by the Darlings, but he's with Liza now. Hooray! So everyone is happy except for Peter. Mrs. Darling actually talks to him and offers to bring him in too, but he insists he will never become a man. But Mrs. Darling says that Peter can take Wendy to Neverland once a year for spring cleaning. In this version I have here, there's also a scene of the next year's spring cleaning where Wendy and Peter talk about their adventures, which Peter has forgotten almost all about. I watched a few versions of the play where it includes the epilogue where Peter comes back to Wendy when she's a grown-up and he takes her daughter to Neverland. I guess how and where the play ends is really up to the interpretation of the director.
I mean, I say that, but after doing research for this segment of the video, it seems like a lot of elements of the play are just kind of up in the air, which makes sense. Because of how much time has passed since the play premiered, and given that there's more than just this play's material to pull from, each interpretation can kind of have its own flavor. Songs or lines can be rearranged, sometimes the director will elaborate on something that's from the book, sometimes Peter gives Wendy a button, sometimes it's an acorn, sometimes there's no talking to the audience, sometimes there's a lot of talking to the audience. And on, like, it's kind of fun to see what each person decides to do. Just a few more quick things before we move on. The role of Peter is traditionally played by a woman, partially to capture the childlike size and vocal range a grown man usually can't, but mostly because it's easier to put a harness on a tiny woman and fly her around the stage. The roles of Captain Hook and Mr. Darling are typically double cast, which means that the same actor plays both roles, and we're actually going to see that in a couple of the film adaptations. And lastly, it's just a good play. Like, go watch it. Please support your local theaters whenever they open again.